Clara Kent had always been told that a woman's greatest virtue was obedience. Her aunt and uncle repeated it like scripture. Obey your elders. Obey your husband. Obey God's design. But Clara had learned early that obedience came at a cost: her voice, her freedom, and sometimes her safety. At 19, she was no foolish dreamer. She worked hard every day on her family's small farm, rising before dawn to haul water from the well, milk the cow, and collect eggs before the desert sun blistered the earth. She knew the world was unforgiving. She knew a woman's choices were few, but she also knew that her hand in marriage, her heart, should be hers to decide. And that is why the trouble began. Aunt Mildred had always believed Clara to be ungrateful. A girl without parents should be thankful for any offer. She scolded the night before the public announcement. Clara's mother died of fever when Clara was 7, and her father never made it back from a cattle drive gone wrong. From that moment, Clara belonged to her aunt and uncle belonging. In Mildred's mind, meaning Clara owed them everything. But even under strict guardianship, Clara grew into a young woman who noticed injustice, who pushed back, who said no. When she learned who her aunt had chosen as her future husband, that no became unshakable. Reed Morgan, the wealthiest rancher in the territory, was a man Clara had feared since she was a girl. His cruelty was whispered about by women in the mercantile, his temper widely known, his cold eyes sharper than the spurs on his boots. He wanted a wife only to bear his heirs and tend his estate. He did not want a partner. He wanted possession. Clara had seen him strike a stable hand for merely dropping a curry brush. She had seen him yank a courting woman by the wrist until she cried out. She had seen enough. She told her aunt she would rather die than marry him. The silence afterward had been worse than the shouting. Mildred's face, always pinched with irritation, twisted into something darker. There was fear there, fear of debt, fear of reputation, fear of defiance spreading like wildfire. "You think you have a choice?" Mildred hissed. "That man offered to pay our debts. He is willing to overlook your rude manners and wild opinions. He is rescuing you, you foolish girl. And this is how you repay us?" Clara trembled, not with fear, but with fury. She stepped back, chin raised. "I will not belong to a monster." Mildred's palm struck Clara's cheek so hard stars exploded in her vision. "Girls who refuse salvation," her aunt spat, "must be taught what suffering truly is." The next morning, word spread across town that Clara Kent would be disciplined for rebellion and disrespect. The sheriff, an acquaintance of Reed Morgan, was quick to issue the order. They said it was to correct immoral behavior. They said it was for her own good. No one argued. Now, standing in the center of the dusty street as the entire town gathered in a ring of silence, Clara felt the worst betrayal wasn't the punishment, it was the eyes all around her. Neighbors who had taken her eggs in trade, women who had once braided her hair at church socials, men who had nodded politely when she carried milk into town. They watched, some with pity, some with indifference. None stepped forward. Her wrists were bound to the whipping post. The sun overhead seared the back of her neck. Dust clung to the tears she fought not to shed. She would not give Reed Morgan or her aunt the satisfaction of seeing her break. Still, the whip cracked behind her like thunder. Perhaps obedience would have been easier. A small voice whispered inside her, but she shut it out. She clung to her anger, to her stubborn pride, to the belief that her life was worth choosing. Each lash burned, tore, and bled into the fabric of her dress and the skin beneath. The world blurred. Her knees weakened. But Clara held on to the post and refused to scream. Across the crowd, unseen by her, a pair of dark eyes watched with growing fury, eyes belonging to a man who would not let this injustice continue. But Clara did not know that yet, right now. She only knew one thing. She would rather endure 1,000 lashes than say yes to a cruel man. The first lash had been agony. The fifth was a wildfire licking up Clara's spine. By the 10th, the pain no longer felt like something happening to her body. It felt like something tearing into her very spirit. The sheriff behind her showed no hesitation. Each swing of his arm was practiced, almost casual, as though he were repairing a fence instead of striking a young woman tied helplessly to a post. The whip bit deep, curling around her ribs, leaving angry marks that would become scars whether she lived or not. Clara's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. Sweat and blood mingled between her shoulders. She tasted iron, dust, her own stubborn pride. Only once did a thin, cracked cry escape her lips, and she immediately regretted giving her tormentors that satisfaction. Her Aunt Mildred watched from the front row, arms crossed, lips pressed in a thin, victorious line. Clara wondered if there had ever been love in that woman's heart, or if it had been choked away long ago by bitterness and fear. Mildred's eyes betrayed no softness, no conflict, only cold conviction that she was right. She will learn. Mildred muttered to a neighbor, loud enough for Clara to hear. A wife must obey. Better she understands this now. But Clara was not learning obedience, she was learning who these people truly were. Reed. Morgan arrived halfway through the punishment, striding down the street as though he owned it. Which, in truth, he practically did. He tipped his hat lazily at the sheriff, but did not once look at Clara's face, only her body, twisted in pain. "That's enough for now," he said after a moment, voice dripping with self-importance. "We don't want to damage the goods." Goods. That word sank deeper than the whip ever could. The sheriff paused, whip dangling from his hand as he awaited further instruction. Clara fought to lift her head, eyes burning. Reed stepped closer, boots stopping in her blurred line of sight. "You'll marry me," he said flatly, "and this disobedience will be forgotten." For a moment, just a moment, Clara wondered if survival was worth surrender. But then she remembered the look she'd once seen in Reed's eyes when he kicked a stray dog off his land, how he enjoyed its yelp, how he smiled as it limped away. She remembered the stable boy gripping his bruised wrist. She remembered his temper, his pride, his hunger to rule over everything and everyone. She forced her trembling jaw to stiffen. Never. Reed's expression turned to stone. A muscle ticked in his cheek. Then break her. With a nod, the sheriff raised the whip again. The crowd flinched, but still no one intervened. Women lowered their gazes. Men shifted uncomfortably. A few children were pulled away by angry mothers who didn't want them witnessing this cruelty. Yet not one person stepped forward to stop it. The next lash came. Harder. Clara's knees buckled. Her vision dimmed around the edges. She felt her grip on consciousness slipping like water. Through her fingers, and then through the haze of agony, she saw movement at the edge of the crowd. A tall figure with raven black hair and sun-bronzed skin, dressed in Apache buckskin, stepped closer. He said nothing, but his dark eyes blazed with a fire that matched the burning on her back. His jaw clenched as though each strike hit him instead. She didn't know his name, but the intensity of his stare anchored her to the world for one more heartbeat. But before anything could happen, the sheriff finally lowered his arm. Reed raised a hand, signaling a halt, perhaps satisfied that Clara was sufficiently broken. She wasn't, barely conscious. Clara sagged against the post. The ropes at her wrists were all that kept her standing. "Take her," Reed ordered the sheriff. "Lock her in the barn until morning. She accept the marriage by then." Men untied her and dragged her through the dirt, her boots scraping lifelessly behind her. Clara's ears rang. The world tilted and spun. She could not fight, could not speak, but her last flicker of awareness was of the Apache warrior melting back into the crowd like a shadow. yet not disappearing without one final look. A promise lived in that gaze, a promise Clara could not yet understand. She would not be left alone in this nightmare. The crowd dispersed slowly, whispers floating in the dry air like dust stirred by a passing wind. Mothers murmured to their children. Men exchanged low grumbles about taxes or the cattle market. And Reed Morgan strutted back to his mansion, satisfied that discipline had been meted out. Clara, still trembling, was dragged into the dark interior of the barn. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind her, leaving her in near darkness except for a sliver of moonlight cutting across the straw-strewn floor. Her back throbbed, each movement a sharp reminder of the lashes she had endured. She sank to the ground, her body curling into itself, and allowed herself a few desperate, silent sobs. But even as pain threatened to overwhelm her, Clara sensed something. A presence outside. Not part of the crowd, not aligned with Reed or her aunt. A watchful, measured presence that didn't waver. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a stance that was both relaxed and ready, like a predator or a warrior. Dark hair fell across his forehead, partially hiding his eyes, but not enough to conceal their intensity. Those eyes had seen something in Clara that the rest of the town had ignored. Injustice. Fear, defiance, a spark of life that refused to be snuffed out. She had no name for him. No way to speak, no strength to even call out. Yet she felt his gaze settle like a protective blanket over her. A silent promise that someone outside the barn knew what had been done to her and cared enough to notice. The Apache warrior, Tasuken, had come into town under the pretense of trade, a rare visit to the outskirts of white settlements to exchange pelts, horses, and knowledge. He had no allegiance to Reed Morgan, no debt to Clara's aunt, no reason to intervene in the petty cruelty of this town. Yet, as he watched from the shadows, his jaw set tight with indignation. He had witnessed enough violence in his life to know cruelty when he saw it. And this display of deliberate punishment against a young, defenseless woman struck a chord deep within him. His hands itched for action, but he remained still, knowing that rash movement could alert the guards or Reed's men. For now, observation and patience were his allies. Clara, her tears glistening in the faint moonlight, did not yet see him clearly. Her vision blurred with pain, but she felt the difference in the atmosphere, an absence of indifference, a presence of intent. Something told her that she was not entirely alone. Something told her that someone might be coming. Tasuken's mind raced as he weighed his options. He was a man of action, not of hesitation. Yet he also knew that brute force could end in disaster for Clara. She was bound, weak, and at the mercy of Reed Morgan's men. Any misstep could cost her life. He would need stealth, speed, and strategy, a quiet extraction before anyone even suspected. For now, he remained hidden, a silent sentinel, scanning the barn and the street outside. He noted the guards' positions, the shift of shadows, the squeak of hinges, the pattern of the wind. He memorized every detail, every potential escape route. And all the while, his gaze lingered on Clara, on her resilience, her defiance, the small, stubborn flicker of spirit that had refused to break under the lashes, even without knowing her. Tasuken had made a choice. He would not allow her to remain a victim. Not if he could prevent it. There was no speech, no negotiation, no hesitation, only a decision rooted in instinct, honor, and an unspoken understanding that injustice was meant to be challenged. As Clara curled into the corner of the barn, shivering from pain and shock, she felt the first hint of hope. It was fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind, but it was there. A presence, unseen but palpable, assured her that not everyone had abandoned her to cruelty. Somewhere beyond the barn, someone had recognized her suffering and decided she was worth saving. The night stretched long, the darkness thick, but the warrior remained outside, waiting, watching, planning. And in that vigil, an unspoken connection began to form, a bond forged not by words, but by acknowledgement. She would not face this torment alone. The first step of her salvation was already in motion. Though neither she nor the town knew it yet, the barn was quiet now, save for the rasping of Clara's shallow breaths and the occasional creak of the wooden beams overhead. Dawn was still hours away, the moon casting silver streaks across the dirt floor. Each movement sent jolts of pain across her back and legs, a cruel reminder of the punishment she had endured. Outside, the night held its own secrets. Shadows danced among the edges of the town, carried by a gentle wind that rustled through the empty streets. And one shadow moved with purpose, silent as a whisper. Tasuken, the Apache warrior who had made a choice he could not ignore. He had waited until the last guard had left his post, until the town's dogs had stopped barking at imagined intruders, until the moonlight painted the world in soft silver tones that would conceal him. Every step toward the barn was measured, deliberate, careful. One misstep, one creak, and Clara's life and his plan could be ruined. Reaching the barn, he paused. Through a small gap in the door, he saw her curled up on the floor, trembling. Her hair was matted with sweat and dust, her dress torn in places, her bare feet smeared with straw and dirt. The sight ignited a surge of protective fury in him. He had never met her before, but he could feel the injustice in her very bones, the raw vulnerability that no one in this town had spared her. "Tasuken?" Clara whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and shouting. She did not know his name, but she sensed him somehow. The recognition was instinctive, primal, a human awareness that she might not be alone in this darkness. He nodded slightly, his dark eyes scanning the barn for danger before he stepped closer. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and commanding. "I'm here to take you away. Quietly. Come with me." Her heart skipped a beat. Escape seemed impossible. She was weak, injured, and still reeling from the pain and humiliation. Yet something in his presence, calm, deliberate, unyielding, gave her a strength she did not know she had left. He moved swiftly, untying the ropes binding her wrists while keeping one hand on her shoulder, steadying her trembling body. "Hold on to me," he instructed. His voice left no room for argument. She obeyed instinctively, allowing him to guide her through the shadows. The town slept, or pretended to. The air was thick with the scent of smoke from distant chimneys, dust from the dry streets, and the faint tang of blood and sweat from her injuries. Every step Tasuken took was silent, precise, as he led her toward the edge of the settlement where the desert met the low hills and scattered cliffs. Clara's legs quivered beneath her weight. I can't walk far," she admitted, voice barely audible. "You can," he said firmly. "You must. Trust me." And she did. Not because she knew him, but because she had no other choice, and because something about him radiated a quiet certainty she hadn't felt in years. Finally, they reached the stables. Tasuken lifted her gently onto his horse, a strong, dark creature with eyes as alert as its rider's. He swung up beside her with effortless grace. For a moment, Clara's fear almost overcame her, the height, the speed, the thought of leaving everything behind, but he wrapped an arm around her waist, steadying her, whispering, "You are safe now." They rode in silence, the town shrinking behind them, dust curling in their wake like smoke from a dying fire. Rain began to fall lightly, misting the desert night, washing away the day's heat and the horrors of the past hours. It was cold and sharp, but Clara welcomed it, letting it sting her skin, cleanse her of the town's judgment, if only a little. Her back throbbed with every jolt of the horse's gait. Her heart raced not from fear, but from the strange, growing awareness that she was no longer entirely powerless. Somewhere deep in the darkness of the night, a warrior had chosen her life over nothing. And for the first time in hours, maybe days, she allowed herself to hope. As they rode deeper into the desert, the world behind them faded into shadows. Ahead was uncertainty. Danger, perhaps, but also freedom. Freedom bought not with obedience, but with courage, stealth, and the protective hand of a stranger who would soon become her protector. For the first time since her punishment, Clara let herself exhale, letting the wind carry away her fear even as her body ached. She did not yet know who Tasuken was, or why he had chosen her, but she understood one thing clearly. She was no longer alone, and in the vast silence of the desert night, that was enough. The desert night stretched endlessly around them, a vast canvas of black and silver. Clara clung to Tasuken's side, each jolt of the horse sending sharp waves of pain across her back, reminding her of the punishment she had endured. Rain began to fall in earnest, drumming on the horse's mane and the brim of Tasuken's hat, soaking them both, but he paid it no mind. The storm was an ally, hiding their flight from prying eyes and washing away the scents that might betray them to pursuers. Clara's teeth chattered, not entirely from the cold. Her body ached, but her mind raced even faster. She thought of her aunt's gloating face, of Reed Morgan's cruel eyes, and of the townspeople who had watched without a flicker of compassion. And yet, beside her, Tasuken moved with calm assurance, unshaken by the wind or the mud under the horse's hooves. "How far? Are we going?" she asked, her voice weak, almost swallowed by the storm. "Far enough," he replied simply. His dark eyes scanned the horizon even as his hands maintained a firm grip on the reins. "They will not follow us here." Clara looked at him then, really looked at the strength in his shoulders, the taut muscles of his arms, the way he seemed to merge with the horse beneath him. Every instinct in her screamed that this man was not merely a stranger. He was a protector, a force of nature, and somehow, in a single night, her lifeline. The storm grew heavier. Rain sluiced down her face, masking the tears she could no longer hold back. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words stuck in her throat. Her pride, her fear, and the faint hope that had blossomed earlier tangled into a tight knot she could not unravel. Tasuken seemed to sense her struggle. Without a word, he adjusted his grip on her waist, steadying her. "Do not think of them," he said. "Think only of staying with me. One step, 1 mile at a time. You will not be harmed again." Clara shivered against him, not only from the cold, but from the strange, warming certainty that he meant every word. In his presence, she felt seen not as an object, not as a debtor to be sold, but as a human being who deserved choice, who deserved freedom. The desert was unforgiving. The wind bit at their faces, and the rain slicked the rocky paths, making every step treacherous. The horse slipped once too often for comfort, and Clara gasped as she clutched Tasuken's arm. He muttered softly under his breath, guiding the animal carefully, speaking in a low tone that seemed to calm both horse and rider. Hours passed. The storm showed no mercy, but neither did he. Together they rode, moving through the darkness and rain, until the town, the life she had known, the place that had betrayed her, faded into memory. Her chest heaved from exhaustion and adrenaline. Yet the sharp ache of terror that had accompanied her since the whipping slowly eased, replaced by something else, a fragile sense of hope. I don't know your name," she admitted finally, her voice trembling. "Tasuken," he replied, his voice a low, steady hum against the howling wind. "It is enough that you know I will not let harm come to you." Her lips pressed together, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to thank him, to pour out every emotion, every fear and pain and gratitude, but the storm, the dark, the exhaustion made words impossible. Instead, she let silence speak, letting the bond between them, formed in flight and survival, grow in quiet strength. The first signs of dawn appeared as a dim gray light brushing the clouds. Tasuken slowed the horse, scanning the horizon. Clara, soaked and shivering, rested her forehead against his back, exhausted, trusting, and for the first time in her life, unafraid. She did not know what lay ahead, what dangers remained, or what path this strange man would lead her down, but she knew one thing. She was no longer a prisoner of her aunt, Reed Morgan, or the cruel town, and as the storm raged behind them, masking their flight and erasing their tracks, she realized that this ride, this terrifying, storm-lashed escape, was the first step toward a life entirely her own. Tasuken's presence, unwavering and protective, was the promise she clung to. A promise that in this vast, wild land, she would no longer face fear alone. By the time the first pale sunlight broke through the clouds, Clara and Tasuken had reached a hidden canyon nestled deep in the wilderness. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, sparkling with dew and the smell of damp earth. Tasuken led her to a small camp, secluded among the rocks, where a fire was already crackling. The heat, though gentle, offered her a comfort she had not felt in days. Clara dismounted with Tasuken's steadying hand, her legs still weak from exhaustion. The bruises along her back throbbed with every movement, each step a reminder of the cruel punishment she had endured. She wanted to collapse onto the soft grass and cry, yet something in Tasuken's presence, his quiet strength, the unwavering calm of his gaze made her straighten her shoulders. Around the camp, several Apache women moved with quiet purpose, tending to herbs and preparing water. They spoke softly among themselves, their voices gentle, almost musical. When they saw Clara, their expressions softened. They did not recoil at her bruises or her torn dress. Instead, they welcomed her with a calm authority, their hands steady as they offered her warmth, food, and clean water. Clara was wary at first, her instinct shaped by years of harsh treatment and betrayal. She expected judgment, criticism, perhaps even anger. But here, among these women and this warrior who had saved her, she found something different: kindness, patience, a level of respect she had never known. One of the women, older and wise-eyed, knelt before her and began gently washing the blood and dirt from her back using water and a soft cloth. The sting of her wounds was sharp, yet it was accompanied by a strange relief, the realization that someone cared enough to help her heal. Clara's breath caught as she felt the warmth of the woman's hands, the soothing motion, the quiet encouragement. "You are safe now. Breathe." Tasuken remained close, silently observing, his expression unreadable yet intensely focused. Every so often, his dark eyes flicked to Clara, checking for signs of pain or distress. He never touched her without her consent, yet the mere proximity of his presence offered a strange, steadying comfort. As the day wore on, Clara sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket, sipping warm water and letting the soothing herbs seep into her skin. She noticed small details: the way Tasuken moved with quiet confidence, the way the women communicated without words, the rhythm of life in the camp simple, natural, respectful. It was a stark contrast to the harshness of the town she had left behind, where every interaction had been a battle, every glance a judgment. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to feel vulnerable without fear. Her tears flowed freely as she recounted, in broken sentences, what had happened, how her aunt had betrayed her, how Reed Morgan had punished her, and how she had felt utterly alone. The Apache women listened without interruption, offering nods of understanding, soft murmurs of encouragement, and no pity. And then Tasuken spoke, his voice low, steady, and deliberate. "You survived what they thought would break you. That strength, it is yours. It has always been yours. No one can take it from you." Clara looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, she saw him not just as a stranger who had rescued her, but as a man who recognized her worth without question. His eyes were dark, but they held no judgment, no expectation, only acknowledgement. Something shifted in her heart. The fear that had dominated her life, the fear of being controlled, of being punished, of being disregarded, began to loosen. Here, in this hidden canyon, with the Apache warrior who had saved her and the women who tended her wounds, she found a sanctuary. Not just of safety, but of respect, understanding. And there she admitted trust. As the sun climbed higher, warming the camp and drying the remnants of the storm, Clara realized that her journey was far from over. Danger still lurked beyond. These rocks and the memory of Reed Morgan's cruelty would not fade easily. But for the first time, she understood that she did not need to face the world alone. In the quiet intimacy of the camp, surrounded by people who had chosen to see her, to care for her, and to honor her strength, Clara began to believe in a future. She could shape herself a future not dictated by fear or punishment, but by her own choices. And in Tasuken's steady presence, she found the first glimmer of a connection that could be more than survival, a bond rooted in respect, protection, and the possibility of something deeper. Clara had been in the hidden canyon for several days, each one blending into the next with the rhythm of healing and quiet reflection. Her back was still sore, and faint red streaks remained where the lash marks had burned her skin. But the pain was beginning to dull, replaced by a sense of cautious strength. The camp had become a sanctuary, a place where her choices mattered again, where the cruel demands of Reed Morgan and her aunt no longer dictated her life, but the world she had fled from was not so easily escaped. Word of her disappearance had traveled fast through the town, and Clara knew that her aunt and Reed would not rest until she was returned or destroyed. It was only a matter of time before armed men came seeking her. Tasuken had anticipated this. He had trained her in the basics of survival, how to move silently, how to read the desert for signs of others, how to remain unseen. Still, the looming threat weighed on Clara like a shadow she could not shake. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, painting the rocks in fiery shades of orange and red, Tasuken approached her. He was quiet, deliberate as always, but there was a weight to his expression she had not seen before. "They may come for you," he said simply. "You must decide what you will do if they do." Clara looked into his dark eyes, seeing not only concern but a subtle question. What does she truly want? Here, under the protection of the man who had saved her, she had choices she had never had before. She could leave, return to a life dictated by fear and obligation, or she could stay, embrace the freedom she had earned, and acknowledge the bond forming between them. She began, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can face them, if I can ever return to that place." "You do not have to," he replied, his hand brushing hers briefly. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a warmth through her chest she could not ignore. "You are free to choose. You have survived. You have strength. And you do not have to be afraid anymore." Clara's mind raced. She thought of her aunt's gloating, of Reed Morgan's cruelty, of the townspeople who had watched her suffer in silence. Then she thought of the desert night, the storm, the relentless ride into the wilderness, and the sanctuary that Tasuken had offered her. He had risked everything for her life, for her freedom. Her heart swelled with gratitude, and a realization settled over her like the warm light of the setting sun. She did not need to return to the world that had punished her. She did not need to obey anyone who sought to control her. She could stay here with Tasuken and claim her life for herself, but the choice was hers, and it was terrifying. To stay would mean stepping into the unknown, leaving everything she had known behind and trusting a man she barely knew. To leave would mean safety from immediate danger, but it would also mean submission to the same cruelty she had fled. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her chest ease slightly with the realization that the decision was hers alone. I want to stay," she whispered, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I want to choose my own life, and I want to stay with you." Tasuken's expression softened for the first time, a subtle warmth breaking through the stoic mask he usually wore. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, and extended his hand. "Then stay. You are welcome here, and I will not let harm come to you, not now, not ever." Clara took his hand, feeling the solid strength of it, the quiet assurance that had carried her through the storm and into this sanctuary. For the first time since she had been punished, since she had been whipped and humiliated, she felt the exhilarating freedom of choice. Freedom, she realized, was more than survival. It was the power to say yes or no. It was the ability to reclaim her body, her heart, and her future. And in that moment, with the fiery sunset painting the canyon walls and Tasuken standing beside her, Clara knew she had made the first choice of her life that was truly her own. The sound of the desert wind carried through the canyon, whispering over the rocks as if confirming her decision. She was no longer a victim, no longer a prisoner of fear. She was free, and she had chosen the path that would define her future. And for the first time in her life, she smiled not a fearful, cautious smile, but one of courage, hope, and the quiet thrill of being fully alive. The canyon was alive with the soft glow of dawn. The rocks bathed in gold and rose as sunlight spilled over the horizon. Clara stood at the edge of the small camp, feeling the breeze on her face and the warmth of the fire behind her. For the first time since the punishment, since the whipping, she felt the full weight and the full relief of freedom. She had survived the cruelty of her aunt, the brutality of Reed Morgan, and the indifference of the townspeople. But surviving alone had not been enough. What had truly saved her was the choice, the first real choice of her life, to trust someone, to step into the unknown, and to claim her life as her own. Tasuken approached quietly, his presence steady and grounding. She had come to know him not only as a warrior of unmatched skill and strength, but as a man who understood her in ways she had never imagined possible. He had seen her as more than an object, more than a girl to be controlled or sold. He had seen her as she was, strong, brave, and deserving of respect. "You are ready," he said softly, his voice carrying the same calm authority it always did. "Ready to decide the path you will walk." Clara turned to him, her hand still slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. "I am," she whispered. "I choose to stay. Not because I am afraid, not because I have no other option, but because this is where I am meant to be. With you, on my own terms." Tasuken's dark eyes softened, and he extended his hand once more. This time, she took it without hesitation, feeling the solid reassurance in his grip. It was more than a hand. It was a promise, a partnership, a bond forged through trials, danger, and the quiet recognition of each other's worth. The camp around them seemed to respond to the decision. The fire crackling brighter, the wind carrying the scent of sage and damp earth, the distant cries of birds greeting the new day. Clara realized that she was not only choosing Tasuken, but also the life he represented: freedom, respect, and the chance to live fully. Without fear or coercion, her mind flashed back to the town she had left behind, the place where her aunt had tried to sell her future, where Reed Morgan had punished her body, where the world had turned its face from cruelty. That world still existed, but it no longer had power over her. She had claimed her life. She had chosen. Tasuken guided her to the horse, his hand firm but gentle. "We will leave at first light," he said. "The world beyond this canyon is vast and full of unknowns, but we will face it together. You will not be alone." Clara climbed onto the horse beside him, feeling the weight of her past lift with every heartbeat. She looked down at the canyon, at the fire that had warmed her, at the women who had tended her wounds, and whispered a quiet farewell to the pain and fear that had held her captive. They were part of her history, but they would not dictate her future. As they rode out of the canyon, the morning sun casting long shadows behind them, Clara felt a surge of exhilaration unlike anything she had known. She had been whipped, humiliated, and left for broken, but she had been rescued not just by Tasuken, but by the strength within herself to choose freedom over submission, courage over fear. The landscape stretched endlessly before them, mountains, rivers, and plains untouched by the cruelty of her past. Every mile she traveled was a mile away from the girl who had been bound and whipped, and a mile closer to the woman who would live by her own decisions. Tasuken glanced at her, his expression softening. "You have chosen well," he said, "and I will honor that choice, always." Clara smiled, the first full, unburdened smile in weeks. For the first time, she understood that freedom was not merely the absence of chains, it was the ability to live boldly, to love, and to trust. And in Tasuken, she had found not only a protector, but a partner who would walk beside her through whatever challenges the world might throw their way. The desert stretched before them, vast and untamed, a reflection of the new life Clara had chosen. She felt the wind in her hair, the sun on her face, and the solid strength of Tasuken at her side. For the first time, she was truly alive, free, whole, and ready to embrace a future shaped by her own hand. And as they rode into the rising sun, Clara knew with quiet certainty that this was only the beginning, a life of freedom, courage, and love, chosen by her, for her.